It's Model Railroad Q&A time. Let's get to it. This video is brought to you with support from Trains.com. Trains.com is a fantastic source for new and used model trains and accessories. I have bought plenty of things from Trains.com and have always been satisfied. Their wide selection and easy-to-use website makes finding the train you need a breeze. They're great for finding things like old Athearn Blue Box, vintage Lionel, plus a wide selection in all the major scales. And if you're looking to downsize or sell an entire collection, Trains will buy your entire collection. As a special offer to my subscribers, you can use the promo code JimmyDIY to get $10 off your order of $50 or more. You can check them out at the link in the description. Hey everybody, my name's Jimmy. Welcome to Coffee and Trains. Today I'm drinking some Dunkin' Donuts coffee from the Keurig, actually. If you want to tell me what kind of coffee you are drinking and have it featured just like these guys right here, you can put that in the comments below, and who knows, you might see your name pop up on an episode of Coffee and Trains. Also, this is the monthly Q&A that I do where I answer as many of your questions as I can. I will tell you more details on how to get your questions answered at the end of this video. Cheers, guys. Aiden S435 asks, what is the best place to get cheap water slide decals? He says he is custom painting an Inscale F unit in the CP rail paint scheme, and what I would do is there are places like Fusion Scale Graphics, Highball Graphics, those kind of places. I also look a lot on eBay. There's a lot of them out there on eBay. All you need to do is simply Google what you're looking for, and a lot of times you can find it on eBay, and most of them show exactly what you need in N and HO scale. That's how I found the ones for my Yadkin Valley Railroad SD40-2 that I did a custom job for. So definitely eBay is a really good place to look for it, because a lot of the places that do these are so small that they don't actually have a website and they just rely on eBay for their sales. So check out eBay. Aiden S. with another question. He says, how do you know where to put a track feeder for power when using Unitrack? Well, for putting in track feeders, you really just want to put them where, I like to put them where there's breaks in the connectivity potentially. So really this is just in between turnouts. You want to make sure that each side of the turnout is power. Each direction that can come off the turnout has power, especially if you have like two turnouts back to back. That little spot in between the two of them can be a dead zone potentially. So putting a feeder right in between there is another great spot. But basically, look at turnouts as the little breakup points for kado Unitrack. So because they're power routing, which means that the direction past them is not going to have power if it's not set to that direction. So you just want to make sure that you have power to every spot that you could possibly need power, regardless of whether or not a turnout is set to that direction. Bishop Lee Baker 7003 asks a power question. He says he's finished a simple 50-foot folded dog bone layout, and he has a Bachmann Spectrum ON30280 locomotive with an MRC Rail Power 1730 or 1370 power pack. And he has used 4 feeder lines across of it, and he has some issues with the power where he's not getting power to the locomotives. He says the power pack light shows significant drain with no movement to the engine. Well, without being able to see your entire setup, what I would basically do is what I do when I go through the process of figuring out what my issue is, and that is what I call a fault tree. And a fault tree is basically where you work through the process of what could possibly be the issue. And when you find something that could be an issue, you branch off towards that direction, hence the fault tree. So what I would start with is just looking at the power pack itself. See if it is providing power. I would hook up some feeders to it, flip your engine upside down, and see if it powers the locomotive and gets it going just by touching the wires on the pickups. And if it does, then you know that your fault is not in the locomotive. If it does not power the locomotive and does power, you can, if you have another locomotive, try that. You can definitely try to see if there's an issue with the locomotive, and if there is, that's going to be something that's could be tough to figure out. But if you're not having an issue with the locomotive and it's getting power, then it comes down to your connections with your track and things like that. You can check for short circuits, make sure all your wires are connected the same way. That's what I would do. A voltmeter is something that can definitely help out with this as well. But yes, fault tree, just slowly work through your issues, starting with power directly from the power pack to the locomotive and bypassing the train, and then work out from there and see if it is the locomotive that's the issue or if it's the wiring and the track that's the issue. Thomas L. Durbin 2517 asks actually 3 questions, and he says his first question is, what is a safe grade for Inscale? And he says most people say that it's around 2 to 4%, and I would say that 4% is definitely the upper end of what I would do in terms of the grade, and I really try to stay below 2.5%. I have a 2.3% grade on the backside coming into West Valley, and then going through my mountain pass, it's actually a 4% grade down. That was kind of unavoidable. But basically, it's not a matter of is the locomotive going to fly off or do anything like that. It's just a matter of how much can it haul up the hill and whether or not you're going to need something like a helper service or you're going to need consisted locomotives. My 2.3% grade, I can typically, a single diesel can typically pull maybe like between 5 and 10 cars up it without any trouble. When it's consisted, I can definitely get about 20, 25, somewhere around there with 2 locomotives. So it's really just depends on what you need. If you don't have a ton of rolling stock, you're going to roll up to it. You can definitely increase how much grade, but I wouldn't go above 4%. You're going to run into some serious issues with probably slippage and things like that. You can also consider a product like Bullfrog Snot that's going to give you, it's a liquid traction tire, and you can also try something like that. But keep in mind that may also affect the power pickups of your locomotives. The second question is, what is the minimum clearance needed for bridges and tunnels for the tallest Inscale freight car? And what I have found is I tried to go for 2.5 inches. The great way to figure that out is see what people recommend for helix levels, because that's definitely, you're going to need that clearance all the time. But I think I have about 2.5 inches on my bridge back here that everything goes under and over. And I run double stack container well cars through there. So I'm pretty sure 2.5 inches will definitely do fine for you. And most time 2 inches will do fine. Just depends on what you're running. But that should do you just fine. Definitely 2.5 inches. The third question is, what are my thoughts on Pico Track, especially in regards to Inscale and their turnouts? Pico Track is great. I personally haven't used it, but I know a bunch of people that have, and it works really, really good. It's one of the higher end track brands for model railroading. And you also ask about, do all the frogs need to be juiced, or do the insole frogs run smoothly? So insole frogs are power routing, and basically that's not going to be the best for DCC. The electro frogs are going to be better, but also kado unitrack turnouts are power routing. So it just really, it depends on what you're really going for. It can't hurt to try them, but electro frogs are always going to be better for DCC than insole frogs. J Morgan 1814 asks what my opinion on Ring Engineering's Railro system is. Now, Railro system is a DCC system. That control system is definitely a more premium DCC system. The screen has a very nice display for the controller, and it's just a very nice system. It's not the cheapest system in the world, but it's definitely one of the premium DCC control systems. So I haven't personally used it, but I do know that it is one of the higher end systems, and it's got a lot of neat features with it. Phoenix Knight 79 asks, how hard would it be to take an HO scale train set like from Hobby Lobby and make it so it could run either DC and DCC on it? Well, that would actually be really simple, because you're looking at one single feeder for that starter set. Then all you got to do is basically, you have a couple of options. You can just have it where like you cut into it and put a double pole, double throw switch on it, so you can switch back and forth and wire up a DCC system coming on one side and DC on the other. You could also just buy Bachmann's Easy Command system, and it uses the exact same connector as the DC controller that comes with your starter set, and you could just unplug that from the DC system and plug it into that Easy Command system. So basically, it's just a matter of disconnecting from the DC system and connecting it to a DCC system. The wiring is not going to be that different. I think that's one thing that a lot of people get a little mixed up on, is that they think that wiring for a DCC system is really different and more difficult than a DC system. Actually, if you're doing multiple locomotives on a DC system, DC wiring is more complicated than DCC. DCC, all you have to do is just have the wire connected and make sure you're not having the wires cross so they short circuit. And then you're just literally sending commands to the locomotive itself, and the DCC system is just providing kind of a constant power with that signal. So DCC wiring is actually simpler than DC wiring, believe it or not. I think that's a common misconception. Snowman Fred says they're just getting back in the hobby and will be modeling an HO scale, and asks what paint is best for repainting old locomotives and rolling stock. He says he does have an airbrush. Well, the funny thing is I went to look at what I have, and I actually ripped the label off of this bottle, so I had to go look it up. This is True Color paint. This is actually, I needed to do a little fix on my Chicago and Northwestern 400, so this is the green from Chicago and Northwestern. True Color paint's a good one. I also think that Vallejo is one that I'll use. Their model paint, so that's another one that I will use. But those are typically the two that I would do. One thing I would do is not use any of the cheap acrylics like the Apple Barrel or anything like that, because those have a tendency to fade just because their pigments are usually they're either more watered down or they're more inexpensive. They're not mixed as well. You really want to go with something that's meant for models. True Color, Vallejo, like all of those are great. Testers, of course, isn't one that's widely known, but those are the kind of things that I would look at. Bob Ainsworth, 5057, asked about Engine Driver, and he says he uses it through the Digitrax Wi-Fi. Engine Driver is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to control your model railroad. It is a fantastic app for your phone. It is Android only, but my primary phone's an iPhone, but I bought a cheap track phone off of Amazon. It was like a $50 Samsung Galaxy A03, and that's what I use as my controller. So buying those cheap Android phones, and you don't even have to activate them. You just connect them to the Wi-Fi for your Y-Throttle server, and you just run that. Engine Driver is a fantastic app. It's super easy to consist locomotives. They've done a lot of updates and upgrades to it. If you have DCCEX, you can now do CV programming through Engine Driver. There's a lot of cool things you can do with it, and I think it's one of the coolest things that has come out recently with model railroading over the past 10 years. Tobias L1000 says they wanted to buy an AccuTrack speedometer too, but it's out of production. He says there's nothing on eBay's, is that there's an alternative that is easy to use. Well, the only one that I could find, and let me make sure I get this name right, this is the DRM SPC 100R speedometer, and it's basically like a little PCB circuit board with an LCD screen. It's got 2 infrared sensors, and it looks like you just calibrate it that way. I'll put a link to it in the description. If you don't want to get that, you can also just put 2 marks on your layout, something that just marks it, and you can run the trains in between the two and do like a start and a finish and do a start stop on a stopwatch, just like when they say that when you're on a highway and it says speed limits enforced by aircraft, looking at you, Virginia. That's how they do it. They have lines on the road that you cross so they can time you in between those marks. So you can use that method for checking your speed on your locomotives. Bildorn Bush 2475 asks, what coupler brands work together? And he asks, how do I couple and uncouple? And he says he just got an Atlas GB40-2, and it has the Accumate couplers. And he said, do I need rolling stock with Accumate couplers, or will other couplers work? So it's kind of a complicated question, because you can make couplers work unless they're just flat out like, I've even been able to get, like, if you fiddle with it, you can get Rapidos to work with the knuckle couplers. But really, a lot of couplers are built to be micro trains compatible, because micro trains is pretty much the standard for Inscale couplers, and a lot of companies just make their couplers micro trains compatible. I'm thinking Athearn, Atlas, Broadway Limited, and there's a couple others that make theirs compatible. And ones that will work with it are going to be Scale Trains couplers are okay. They'll definitely work with it. I don't have too many issues with that. Same way with Bachmann. Bachmann couplers usually work fine with micro trains. The one that has the most issues, and it really kind of makes me sad, is that probably the best, like the most solid Inscale locomotive company, which is Kado. And their couplers, like fantastic locomotives, I do not like their couplers. So that is what I would say is micro trains is going to be the best, and Atlas will work with those. Athearn will work with those. Bachmann, Scale Trains, Trainworks, Broadway Limited, All those are pretty much that. So like the style of the micro trains knuckle couplers is pretty much what I would go with for couplers, and those are the ones that work together. The only one I really have issues with is kado, and most time I can even make those work. So yeah. Officer VK00123 asks, at what point in terms of layout size would you recommend switching to DCC, and is it really difficult if everything I have is only DC? So layout size really doesn't govern whether or not you should switch to DCC. So DCC, the big advantages of DCC are all the features that you can add onto a locomotive and control it, individual control of locomotives on the same track so that you can run multiple locomotives together and control them individually. And it's just overall, it's a simpler wiring process. Now, the caveat with this is that locomotives have to have that decoder installed. So what you're going to run into when you say you have everything that's DC, I'm assuming you mean your locomotives as well, is if you have DCC ready locomotives, which is basically what DC locomotives are now for the most part. There's some exceptions when you get to the really low end locomotives, but when you have those DCC ready, it means that they're ready for a drop-in decoder of some kind, that you can do that. They have a slot, it's ready, or a plug, and it's ready. When you get to the older locomotives, think about older Athearn blue boxes and things like that, you're going to run into a couple of issues. And the first issue is you're going to run into a power issue. Those motors are older, and this is more prevalent in HO scale than Inscale. But those motors are older and basically need more power. They're going to need a couple of amps maybe. They're going to need 1, 2, 3 amps, something like that. So, and DCC decoders, a lot of them are not built to supply that amount of power. So you're going to have a power issue. So you have to do something potentially called repowering. And when you repower the locomotives, you basically just put a new, more efficient modern motor in it so that'll run it. And that can get a little bit complicated because you got to figure out what motor goes in there. But if I'm saying switching to DCC for DC based on size, I don't think size should be the governing factor. It should be, do you really want to have all the extra features that DCC allows, or is that not that important to you? Woo! I got a yawn. When it comes down to it, size isn't really the factor when you're choosing between DC and DCC. What it really is what features do you want with your locomotives? If you want to be able to run several of them individually on the same track and control them individually, or if you want to use all the features such as sounds, lights, animations, things like that, then you definitely want to consider going to DCC. But also, if you have those DCC ready locomotives, that's going to make that a lot easier. You still got to buy the decoders, but if you're not DCC ready and you've got older engines, you're definitely going to have to do some thinking on that. So those are some things you need to consider when you're doing that, but definitely size isn't really an issue because it's really about the feature set rather than the size of the layout. Johan Trains, he says he's not new to trains, but he's new to the modeling aspect, and he was considering hand laying his track. And he wasn't getting a clear answer on where to get rail for 3-rail O-scale, and he asked for recommendations. Well, there's a website called handlaidtrack.com, and they supply a lot of different things for hand laying your own track, including O-scale rails in various code sizes. And this is probably going to be your best bet, or at least a good starting point. They have a lot of different things. They have a knowledge base section that you can check out, but I would definitely start at handlaidtrack.com, and I will link that in the description. Orconia has asked if I ever considered getting an Inscale brass locomotive. I definitely have considered it. It's just one of those things that's not too terribly high on my priority list. It's probably one of those things once I get to where I'm set on my new layout, I'll do that. But I have a lot of different locomotives that I want to buy and get going before I would consider brass. I'm also more of a modern model railroader, which there's less brass for that than what you would see for more of the golden age stuff in Inscale, at least. But I definitely would consider an Inscale brass locomotive. I definitely want at least one in my collection at some point. White Day asked if I'm ever going to do a review on the Kado ALC 42, and he said I'd be doing it a few months ago. Yes, I did, and I really need to do that. I've got a couple locomotives. I got 2 that I want to do in that review, and that is, I think, the SD90 and the ALC 42. So be on the lookout for that. I'll probably do those 2 together. Those are good little locomotives, and I really like both of them. So be on the lookout for those reviews. I will definitely do that. Okay, if you want to have your question answered in next month's Q&A, you definitely need to get that question written in the comments below. That's where I get these questions from. I try to limit it to there. I want to be fair to everyone, and try to get those in as quickly as possible because I have to cut it off at some point so that I can produce this video. So get those questions in there. I love answering your questions. This is one of my favorite videos to do each month. So definitely check that out. And yeah, I look forward to hearing more of your questions, and it'll be on next month's Q&A. In the meantime, check out some of these model railroad businesses. Klondike's is a family-owned business that makes Inscale T-track modules, mini diorama kits, and Inscale display stands right here in the US. You've seen me feature many of their modules right here on this channel. Check them out at the link in the description. Mini Prints creates 3D printed detail parts, figures, and animals that make your model railroad layout come alive. Get 15% off with code DIY15 at miniprints.com. I'm going to put some of my other Q&As right here, and you can check those out. Please get your questions in quickly. I love answering them, but I got to have them in before I produce the video. Thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, I'm Jimmy from the DIY and Digital. Stay safe, be kind, drink some coffee, and happy railroading.